Welcome back. Now that we've created the Spark pool, let me show you how to interact with a Spark pool. So in order to interact with Spark pool, you'll have to create a notebook. So in order to do that, you come over to the Developer Hub and then click on the plus here, and you can click on Notebook. And that opens up a notebook here. Let me take you through all the options here. We'll start with giving a name. So on the right hand side, you've got the property similar to everything we've seen so far. I'm going to call this one as Demo Notebook, and you can give a description if you wanted to. And you can also specify whether you want to include the cell output when saving it to the repository and things like that. But the main things are here on the top. You've got a few options. The first thing you want to do is attach the notebook to Spark Pool. So if you click on the drop-down, you'll see the Spark pools available. As you know, we've only got one Spark pool, which is the Learn Synapse pool. I'm going to select that. And it says here it's not started. So the pool hasn't still started. The pool that we've created is still just there as metadata and nothing happening to it. And in terms of choosing the language, you've got the 5 choices. As we discussed before, you've got PySpark, Scala, .NET, which is C#, Spark SQL, and Spark R. So you've got the 4 choices here, and I'm going to go for PySpark, and we're going to do this session on using PySpark. But if you wanted to use a different language, please feel free to do that. And the cells, if you're familiar with notebooks, you will be familiar with that. This is where you write your code. You can create as many cells as you want. So you can have a statement here, and then you can have the next statement on the next cell, for example. And we've got 2 different types of cells. As you can see here, you've got a code cell and a markdown cell. Markdown is where you write your comments and things like that. Any documentation you want to do goes in the markdown, and if you have a code cell, this is a code cell. If you want to turn it into a markdown, you just click on that button and then that becomes a markdown. So you can start writing documentation here. So for example, let's say I'm going to just give a heading here, and which is going to be this is a demo notebook. And that looked like this. As you can see, it just gives you a preview at the bottom, and you can just keep writing your documentation here. And also, you've got the ability to, for example, add bullet points. So let me do that. And also you've got the ability to bold italics and things like that. You can format everything. You can add images as well into your documentation. Have a play with this. But this is really useful because you can document everything as you go along and write your code, and it's very useful for someone to look at it. And you don't have a separate document for this. Let's now talk about the code cell because we chose the default language as Python. You have to write your code in Python unless you specify that it is going to be in a different language. We'll talk about that in a minute. But let's say we want to write some Python code here. I'm just going to say x equals hello here. And that is in Python. So you will be able to run it. There are a couple of options to run this code. So you can click on the play button here next to the cell to run just this cell. Or if you want to run the entire notebook, you will just click on the run button on the top here. So we are just going to run the cell. So I'm going to just click on the play button here. As you would have noticed, as you can see, the status here of the Spark pool was not started, but now it is starting. So it says actually, please wait a few minutes while your Spark session starts. So this is the time your Spark cluster is going to be created and you are going to be charged. Up until this point, we had no charges on our account. But from now then, the nodes have been provisioned. We will be charged for our Spark cluster. Let's go to Monitor and see what's happening to our Spark pool. So as you can see here, under Activities under Apache Spark Applications, we've got a new session starting. So we've got a new Spark session being submitted and it's going to start. But if we go to the Analytics pools and Apache Spark pools, it's still seeing allocated cores is 0 and the memory is 0. That's because the session hasn't started yet. But once that's started, you're going to see the actual number of allocated cores, which will be, I think 12, because we got a 3-node R cluster with each one being 4 cores. So let me go over to our notebook. And once that's executed, at the moment, it's waiting. As you can see, once that's successfully executed, we'll come back and have a look at the status of the pool as well. Okay. The code is now successfully executed, as you can see the results here. So we got a successful execution, and the status of the current session says it's ready, so we can run the next statement after this. But if I execute this cell again, it's going to come back quickly and run, as you can see, because there was no need to set up a cluster or anything. There's a cluster already running. So let's now go to the monitor and have a poll to see whether that's allocated any codes. As you can see here, we've got one active user, which is us connecting to the poll, and we've got to upload because being allocated with 96 gigabytes of memory, and if you go to these Spark applications, you will see the logs as well. So as you can see here, we got the logs, you can read them through, but it tells you everything that's happened here as well. So let me now go back to the notebook and tell you how to run cells in other languages, because at the moment we have got a Python cell here. But as I said, you're not restricted to just Python. You can run other language code as well within the same notebook. So in order to do, for example, SQL, you run a magic command, which is %% SQL. And then now within this cell you can write your code in SQL. Similarly, if you're running Scala code, you do a %% Spark, and then you can run Scala commands within that, and C# %% C# as in the letter C, and then sharp. So I can now execute this, and I'll get the results here. And as you can see, I've got the output here as well. So when you come to pick the language for your notebook, pick the language. You're going to be writing your code for the vast majority of the time, and you can mix and match if you wanted to, but keep it as minimum. So if you have a PySpark notebook, try and write everything in Python rather than mixing Python and Scala. But if you only found a library in Scala, you have to do some of the code in Scala. You've got the option to do that here. So one last thing I want to talk about is session timeout. As you can see here, the status of this session currently is ready. So that is up and running. So if you run under the command, that's going to be executing and giving it the results immediately back, which is great. But then does it really finish, because Spark Pool is only going to end 5 minutes from then. All the sessions have completed, so this session has to complete before our Spark Pool can terminate itself. And for that, we've given 5 minutes of termination time. So if you hover over here, you're going to see that this Spark Pool is currently ready. But the session will expire in this case in 29 minutes. Where did that 29 minutes come from? So the 29 minutes comes from a setting here. If I click on that one under configuration, you will see the session time out at 30 minutes. So what that means is when you run your last command, our last cell, it's going to be alive for the next 30 minutes before terminating. So from that point, you've got 30 minutes of session being running, and then you've got this Spark Pool being running for another 5 minutes. So the Spark Pool really shuts down after 35 minutes. So you'll still be charged for that 35 minutes period. So we're not using our cluster for any production scenario. We're just learning. So we don't want to be charged for the entire 35 minutes, even though we are not doing anything. So we want to keep the session timeout as minimum as possible as well. So you can go down again up to a minute? I think so. If I just said 1, that will accept it. But I'm going to just go for 5 because we might be talking in between doing execution of 2 cells. So I don't want it to be terminating. So I'm going to just go for 5 here, and let's click apply. So what that means is that from this point onwards, my session is going to be running for 5 minutes. After the last execution of the command, and then my Spark Pool is going to be executing for another 5 minutes. So it's only 10 minutes. It's going to be idle without being used. So I'm happy with that. Let me demonstrate that. Let me run this cell, and that should start the cluster back again. And that take a couple of minutes. So we'll come back in a couple of minutes. As you can see, the command has now executed, and also our session is ready as well. So let me go to monitor, and let's see in the Spark applications. As you can see, we had one stopped, which is the previous one, and we got another one running at the moment. And if you go to Spark Pools, you're going to have the allocated cores as to always well, but we want this allocated cores of 12 to be freed up in order for that to happen. We need the Spark application to stop. That will take 5 minutes as we've seen. So let's wait for that to happen. As you can see, the session has now timed out. So if we go to the Apache Spark Pools within about 5 minutes, that should free up as well. So we'll have a look at that in a minute. Okay. As you can see here, the Learn Spark pool have now been freed up. We don't have any Learn Spark pool attached to our pool, so we're not going to be billed from this point onwards. It was supposed to take 5 minutes, but it took more like about 8 and 9 minutes, I think. I'm not 100% sure why it probably initiated the release of the records, but it took a few minutes to release them. So I hope now you have a good understanding about how to use notebooks within Spark Pool, how to execute them, and how to monitor them from the monitor within the Snap Studio as well. So that's the end of this session. I'll see you in the next one.